Good morning, everyone. We'll get started in maybe another minute or two, but take your time to get settled in. It's also a nice time to look at the community that's here, including, even if you'd like, you could put something in the chat if that feels appropriate. But just a way to build community, and why people are getting settled, I'll just mention for those of you who live in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, just so you know, we are having people in the building for the Sunday morning program. So we have a big screen. I'm in the office in the building in the center, but I don't know, there's several handfuls of folks that just appreciate being able to sit together, and feel free to come over to the center if you'd like on Sunday morning. And we also have started now a Sunday evening program that's just for the in-person community. It's really the same as Sunday morning, but it's I'll be in the space with everyone teaching. So keep that in mind as well. And like I said, we'll get started in just another minute or so. So I'm pasting in the chat this document that I've been putting out for everyone. And I just add the resources that are specific to the practices that we're doing for that week. So we're moving on to wisdom. So I have some resources about how to understand wisdom from a Buddhist point of view. And also just some information, usually about the chant that we do at the beginning, and about how to contribute to the center. So you can keep that in mind, and I'll post that a little later again. And one of the chants that we've been learning these last few weeks is the traditional impermanence chant. And I mentioned that it's sometimes used at Buddhist funerals or memorial services. And I thought, instead of doing the Pali, which I know isn't everyone's cup of tea, using a scriptural language of Buddhism, but because, of course, what's really important is for us to receive this information, maybe probably to some degree a little challenging, the information, and to memorize it enough so that we can chew on it a little bit, think about it, and most importantly, reflect on it in terms of our actual experience. So feel free to open that document up, and you'll see that impermanence chant. And we'll go right down to the translation. All conditioned things, that means everything, and internally and externally. So all conditioned things arise and pass away. So everything's in motion, always, forever in motion. And the second line is understanding this deeply, or you could say coming into alignment with this truth that everything's in motion, that everything comes and goes, everything's changing. Understanding this deeply leads to the greatest happiness, which is peace. Like I said, the reason we want this bit of information and to be able to recall it, is so that we can get curious, like, well, is that true now? Because it's actually the only relevant thing to do with this kind of spiritual information, is to check it out in our actual life, here and now. Is it true that this conditioned experience arises and passes away? That what is true for me right now is like a river, changing not static, not ground in the way that I imagine this moment of my life is some kind of solid ground. I'm here at Common Ground's office. Boom. I'm Mark Nunberg. Boom. I'm the guiding teacher at Common Ground. Boom. I'm 63 years old. Boom. So we have this way of using concept as it kind of creates the appearance of solid ground. I'm somebody who's like something, or is some way, believes something, and it feels like substantial. And so this chant, this Buddhist reflection on impermanence is just asking us to playfully, with curiosity, shift our view. All conditioned things arise and pass away. Seeing this clearly as it actually is leads to the deepest happiness, which is the peace of release, the peace of not imagining that there's solid ground, or not imagining the heart, the mind is dependent on permanence, but is capable of being fully in alignment with the way nature is, arising and passing, coming and going, flowing on and on like a river. So this is a nice thing to do at the beginning of a sit, just to, when we do a chant, it's not so much about the chanting, although there's some community benefits when we chant together. It really does bring a group together, a little less so maybe on Zoom, but it's just an activity we can share. But the real purpose of chanting actually is to receive the information embedded in the chant and a way that we can memorize it, so that all day long, not just when we're in formal meditation, we can reflect all conditioned things, everything's coming and going, everything's in motion. Life, inner and outer life, is a river. Coming into alignment, understanding this deeply, leads to the deepest happiness, which is peace. How is that truth of change? Does it align with my experience right now? If I relax with the truth of change, does the heart move in the direction of happiness or move in the direction of tightness? We can directly check this out. And that's a really nice setup for the meditation time, which will begin now, just settling in, appreciating that there is this body, this sitting, breathing, hearing, seeing body, smelling and tasting to a more limited degree. There is this body here and now. And just appreciating the truth of this actual experience. And in terms of the reflection we just did, can this experience of the breath, this experience of the body sitting, can it be understood as a river, a changing river of sensation, of bodily activity? Even if the body is sitting in a very relaxed and still manner, even then, how might we understand or perceive the body as a river, a changing river, something that's in motion here and now, as it actually is? So we're not projecting, we're just interested in coming more and more into alignment with the nature of our experience here and now. This more concrete end of our experience as a human being, what we call body. The sitting body, the breathing body, the seeing and hearing and tasting and smelling body. So just the lived reality of the 5 physical senses that we know well. And we cultivate a generous, wholehearted attitude toward this activity of the body, the sitting body. As if it's some kind of beautiful gift to show up with awareness in a generous way. Nothing left out. Everything, in terms of the experience of the body, everything belongs. So there can be this sense with each inhalation, a generous yes, it's like this. And with each exhalation, a generous yes, it's like this now. And this wholehearted, generous presence with the body, with the moment. We just let it mature into a beautiful blossoming of non-harming. It's really an act, an activity of kindness, not wanting to add any more layers of stress, not wanting to plant any more seeds for suffering in our world or in my heart. This is that moral sensitivity or that moral integrity we've been talking about these past weeks. I care about this life enough to be full of care, generous and full of care, so that I don't, because of habit, plant more seeds of tightness in the moment. I want to be here. I want to be relating to the moment in ways that are healing and kind and not causing harm, even in the most subtle ways. And it's these 2 attitudes, this attitude of showing up in a generous way, and this attitude of showing up or relating with this beautiful value of non-harming. Really allow the wisdom to understand this capacity, this natural capacity to let go, like to let go of the impulse to react, or to let go of the impulse to need to control my experience right now, or the impulse to judge myself, or to judge the noise in the room, or to judge anything whatsoever. So this renunciation can also be understood as a capacity to be content with the way it is right now. Doesn't mean that it's perfect. It just means that my heart has the capacity to be at ease with the conditions as they are right now. And that's a nice thing. It's a good thing. This capacity to be content. to renounce the need for things to be different right now, just for a moment or one moment at a time. So each of us in our own way, as we've been, those who have been coming, we've been reflecting on this attitude of renunciation as a very direct and powerful way to access joy in our lives. So when we contemplate being content, letting go of reactivity, being content with the way it is right now in the body, being okay with the way it is in the mind, we can notice the more subtle joy of renunciation, of not needing to fix things, not needing to get somewhere, not needing to get rid of something. This is the joy of renunciation. We could say the joy of letting nature be nature. It's really the beginning of understanding Buddhist wisdom, knowing what this quality of renunciation is, leads the mind to an experience of wisdom. And wisdom here just means, I'm beginning to understand the causes for suffering and the causes for the release of suffering. I'm moving from a place of being in denial or feeling helpless to a place of feeling more empowered, because wisdom is understanding how it all works. This is how suffering comes to be. This is how suffering is released. It's really this maturing of renunciation, the quality of renunciation in the heart. So we're going to continue in silence now, but just doing our best to trust the maturing, as if we're learning to be in the river of our life, this flow of bodily activities and this flow of mental activities. Some will be pleasant, some will be unpleasant. But we're letting the flow, the activity of our life, be what it is, nature. The nature of our life. We're learning to trust it, to feel it, to be in alignment. So in a sense, exposed, not afraid of our life, not afraid of the feelings that are coming and going. But we're just experimenting with not needing to control, not needing to fix, but just staying in the flow of the moment. The activity of the body and the mind, being aware of the activity of the body and the mind, and letting things be. And we trust this feedback, this joy of renunciation, or the peace of wisdom, when we're in alignment with the river of our lives, as opposed to when we're struggling against it and there's tension and stress. So we'll continue in silence now for a while. Whatever arises internally or externally is just part of the river of our lives. And as a meditator, practitioner, our job is to not be confused by the emotions and the thoughts and the sensations and the sounds that come and go, but to learn how to be right in the middle of the river, this activity of the body and the mind, content to allow nature to be nature. Of course, it's not easy for us to stay in the river. The mind tends to get identified with the good stuff and to get identified with the difficult stuff that arises. But at least we can begin to sense this particular Dharma skill of staying in the river of the moment, the changing, flowing river of the body, the mind, the heart, everything flowing on and on. Learning that we don't actually need solid ground in the way we might imagine, but rather we can just let life be what it is, a changing, flowing river. It's already, of course, this way. We're just learning to come into alignment. So instead of sliding into our usual way of meditating, just an encouragement to, in a very simple way, eyes open or closed, either way, sitting in a relatively still manner, relaxed, and just sensing the movement of our life right here and now, as it actually is. So we're not trying to make any kind of special experience. We're just noticing and being aware that things are already, always have been, in motion. Like a beautiful river of our life. And we're just doing our best not to get confused or identified with what we like and what we don't like, but just to stay in the movement of the moment, the flow of our life. So in a way, we're learning how to yield to the truth of change, to soften with it, it's not about getting somewhere or fixing something or getting rid of something. Practice could be understood better as a learning how to align with the way it is right now. So that's why it has more to do with listening, being receptive and sensitive, so that we can actually be interested in the way it is. And of course, we need to get curious about all the ways, because of habit, all the ways the heart tends to hold on, tends to be tight about this or that. And when we notice that holding, that tightness, we relate to it in a friendly way. Is this needed? Is it helpful? Is letting go possible here? This place where I'm holding tightness, is it possible to soften and to allow, to let go? But we learn very quickly that we can't force the letting go. That's just more tightness. Turns out to be a lot more about getting interested in the truth of change, things coming, things going. So, for example, if there's a drama that's showing up in your heart right now about work, about a relationship, whatever, the habit will be for the mind to attend to the content and the emotional feeling of the drama. But the practice is more about noticing that the content and the emotion, the feeling, all of that is a river, a changing, flowing, natural river. The drama is already in motion, already subject to change. We learn to keep that in mind, to be interested in that, the truth of change. just so happens that it turns out to be the most relevant aspect of the present moment, that it's changing. Or at least one of the most relevant aspects of the way it is. So for the last minute, just learning how to stay right in the middle of the currents of our life that are here and now, not fixed in any way, not requiring any grounding. Take a little time, adjust your body. So good to be with everyone. And most of you know we do live stream these Sunday morning programs, so people can be here together on Zoom, but you can also just join in live stream, and that allows us to record it. It also means that I'm spotlighting myself to protect your privacy, and your video screen won't be shared or recorded in our live stream. But it means that if you want to see the community, you need to select on your own computer or device the gallery view. And most of you probably know how to do that. So we're moving on. Those who are relatively new, we've been studying these 10 perfections of the heart. The word is Parami, Paramita in the later Buddhist traditions. And it's just a way of, just in terms of the stories from early Buddhism, these are considered to be the qualities of heart that the Buddha to be, the Bodhisattva, cultivated over many, many lifetimes. And it allowed him then, when he had his deep insight in his last life, that we know him as the Buddha, it allowed him to be a really powerful teacher, because he not only had this deep insight, but he had the kind of personality that allowed him to articulate, to share, to be just a useful leader for the rest of us, so that even now, 2,600 years later, I don't know about you, but these teachings, having been imperfectly translated all these years, of course, they still resonate enough to be really useful for me, and I think for many millions of us probably, even today, this many years later, having moved through so many different cultures, each with their own, cultural tendencies and habits, but somehow the Buddha's understanding of his own mind was such that it, kind of below the level of a lot of our cultural conditioning in terms of understanding the mind. And as I've been talking about the paramis, these beautiful qualities of the heart that really sort of set the stage for waking up, support this awakening process, you don't have to think of them as a linear progression, but it's a nice way to remember them, like generosity or dana as the first of the 10 paramis. It's just because this is a pretty easy step for most of us in our better moments, right? To realize, you know what? It's really not pleasant to be a stingy human being, to be so fixated on my own possessions and my own having that I'm, everybody in a funny way is seen as competition. You're going to take something, even if you're going to take some of my time, and I don't want to share my time with you. I don't want to share my possessions with you. And that's a very tight way to live. So this first parami of generosity, it's just like the heart transcends that prison. When we're stingy, it's like being imprisoned in the stinginess, in the stingy attitudes. And then the blossoming of that generosity is like, oh, I don't want to cause harm. And that's a gift, right? That's a maturing of generosity. Like, I don't know exactly how to do this, but as I live my life, navigate my life, make my choices, I really don't want to be planting seeds or complicit in ways that cause other people to suffer or cause myself to suffer. So we become full of care around this value of non-harming. It's a beautiful blossoming of generosity. Like I care enough, I'm generous enough that I'm willing to restrain myself, refrain from acting in ways that cause harm. That's a gift. And then that matures into like really understanding, oh, this heart has this capacity to be content with what I have. It doesn't mean I'm not gonna, take what's offered or continue to be engaged in the world, but we can engage knowing that what I have is enough. I can still buy a new shirt, even though I'm aware of being content with what I have. And so it really throws into relief the desire for a new shirt or the desire to, even like in a meditation, to move our body. It's like, oh, there is some discomfort because I've been sitting still for 20 minutes. I could move, but I'm content with the unpleasant sensations of having held my body still. So then whether or not I move isn't because I don't know how to be content with my experiences as a human being right now. So then there may be other reasons to buy that shirt or move the body or do whatever we do in life, but it isn't because we're discontent, that we're ill at ease with the conditions of the moment. So part of that happiness of renunciation is knowing how to be at ease with the moment, regardless of the conditions, so that we're not neurotically tight about making things different. We can still participate in the world and make choices and get stuff and give away stuff. But that activity is more about like what makes sense and what's helpful for everyone, as opposed to I'm uneasy and I don't like it. And if I do this, I'll be more easy and I'll like it. Because that's a restless way to live a life. Always thinking we're going to get that sweet spot. And it always, we get just enough juice that it seems to work. But if we take the big picture, we realize it doesn't work. It just leads to the stress of restlessness. Always, I think I mentioned the promise that's never kept. If only, then I'll be happy. And the maturing of those first three, generosity, this beautiful valuing of non-harming, and the capacity of renunciation, the joy of contentment, then that matures into the beginnings of wisdom. And that's what I'm going to talk about for the next couple of weeks. What does wisdom mean in the context of the Buddhist teachings? And like I said, it's really this maturing of the understanding of the joy of renunciation. In a way, it's a kind of generalizing, like when we have little moments and big moments where we realize, I could do that, but I'm okay not doing that, right? And we really see like that power. It's really an empowerment to be content. So then I don't have to do that, but I could do it. I'm not afraid of doing it, but I'm not afraid of not doing it. And then the wisdom is that mind generalizing that insight into, or that developing understanding of renunciation as a way of life. Like, oh, maybe, because what wisdom really is about is, how is it that I end up suffering so much of the time? And how is it that I can have less of the suffering, or perhaps even none of the suffering, right? So that's That's sort of the ground or the area that wisdom occupies. It's interested in how it is that we suffer, I suffer, there is suffering, and how it is that that suffering goes away. That's what wisdom cares about. So wisdom is knowing something about, in a direct, not theoretical, not philosophical, but knowing something directly about how this heart gets tight and how this heart releases that tightness. Suffering and the release of suffering in the most subjective, real sense that we care about suffering and happiness. That's what wisdom is. And the way the Buddha frames this, of course, is that, just from his own living, his own life, that he came to understand from paying attention that the basic problem in life, it isn't nature is somehow flawed. The flaw really is in how the heart, the mind, perceives or apprehends or understands experience. That's the problem. We understand our experience as a human being in a way that justifies grasping, justifies suffering. Greed, hatred, and delusion seem to make sense, seem to be rational and appropriate and necessary. So we use greed, hatred, and delusion in subtle and not so subtle ways, and therefore we suffer. But it feels like, of course I'm full of hate. Of course I want to destroy this, get rid of that. Of course I'm full of lust, thinking if only, then I'll be happy. Of course I've disconnected. I'm unaware. I'm in denial, right? So hopefully when I just said those three things, how obvious, how sometimes lust just makes sense. Hate makes sense. Denial, delusion makes sense, right? Hopefully that rings true for you, because our mind, if we've got the beginning of wisdom, the developing wisdom, then we start to have a more honest perception, understanding of how we do engage in hatred and greed and delusion. And we do pay the price, which is feeling burdened by those mental activities, those mental habits. But it's good. It's because we're on the way. We're beginning to connect the dots. Oh, I've got a big habit of being aversive, but it doesn't help. I have a big habit of being greedy, but I'm beginning to understand that it doesn't really help. I have this habit of denial and distraction and delusion, but I'm beginning to see that it never helps. It doesn't help me, it doesn't help anybody. So in this way, wisdom is very much connected, in a Buddhist sense, wisdom is very much connected with this insight into karma. And we want to hear about karma in a new way, because here in the West, it's just become part of our vocabulary. And it's used in a way of like, you deserve this because you did this in the past, you deserve this now. And it's true that karma is related to this conditionality or the lawfulness or the cause and effect nature of experience, both inner and outer experience. But it's really an insight. It's not about life or Santa Claus or God getting even because we did something bad and now you gotta, you need your just desserts because you did that. And there's these storehouse of consequences just awaiting to nail us when the time is right. But really it's an insight about what refuge is. We actually want to take refuge. It's actually like an empowerment. It's what liberates our mind from any ideas of helplessness. Understanding karma liberates us from being because it's really a prison. Like when we feel we're screwed, like life is just happening and I'm not in control and I can't bend, nature to my will. So I'm just totally at the whims of this and that coming my way. And we can easily fall into a nihilistic view. But karma, understanding karma in the deeper Buddhist sense, means we understand, oh, this experience we're having as a human being is lawful. It's conditional. And see, this aspect of karma that's so important to understand. And one of the forces behind how things unfold for us is the quality of our intention, how the mind is relating. It really matters, always. And so, whatever karma has already been done, well, that's already been done. Whatever intentional actions have been done in the past, that's already in motion, in play. We're living the consequences of that already. All of us are. The world, we're doing that collectively, we're doing that individually. In a very real way, this moment, this experience is the natural, perfect, you could even say, just to be provocative, unfolding of past causes and conditions. But right now, there's another thing that's affecting the way it is, how the mind is relating, how intention in my heart right now, the quality of my intention, which affects how I perceive, how I understand what I do, what I think, what I say, right? That is a present moment input to the way it is. And that present moment input of intention, it's always impactful. And therefore, it never makes sense to believe we're helpless. It's just, even on a simple pragmatic level, if I think I'm helpless, I'm no longer interested in the moment. I'm interested in some kind of escape. Every escape from the present moment is stressful because you can't escape the present moment. We can only imagine that we're escaping through some, expression of delusion, getting in a little bubble and disconnecting from what we're feeling and from what's happening. But it's stressful, any kind of escaping the way it is. So once we understand karma, once we understand that how I'm relating, how my mind is understanding matters, then you see it really starts to shape this feedback loop where now my heart, now the mind values more and more being present, being mindful, because I realize I'm not helpless. And what matters is how I'm relating, how I'm understanding. Therefore, I totally am dependent on being awake, being aware, being mindfully aware, being present, being sensitive, feeling into the moment. Because it's only through this listening, the sensitivity, like we talked about, moral sensitivity, this awareness, that the wisdom can begin to better connect the dots. Oh, when I relate in this way, things get heavier and tighter, and there's more suffering. When I'm relating and understanding in this other way, things get more released, more free, more nimble, more skillful, less suffering. And not only that, but we have the Buddhists pointing out instructions around this is under, in the Eightfold Path, this is under wisdom, the wisdom category of the Eightfold Path, which is wise view and wise intention. And the quality of intentions that the Buddha discovered and has taught us support the letting go, support freedom, is the intention of renunciation, the intention of kindness, and the intention of non-harming or compassion. These three intentions are the only intentions we really need to take care of our life and the moment and our relationships. We need the intention to let go, that capacity, the capacity to care, to be kind, and the capacity to refrain from doing stuff, thinking, speaking, and acting in ways that cause harm. Those intentions are enough. And they replace the intention to be greedy, the if only, then I'll be happy, the intention to be aversive, and the intention to be oblivious or disconnected. And this is, as some of you have heard me mention, it's so trustworthy, this part of the Buddhist teachings about dukkha or suffering, because it's so grounding. Like wisdom, like another way to understand wisdom from the Buddhist frame is that wisdom cares about cause and effect. Wisdom cares about cause and effect because it relates to why I'm suffering. So this grounding in our subjective, our actual experience of feeling bound up or feeling burdened, heavy, tight. Because it just so, as we all know, when we're somewhat settled, I actually care about my suffering. That's not something I have to contrive. It's natural to care that this heart feels tight, this heart feels burdened, this heart feels uneasy. And then, that it's a natural response. Well, what can I do? What's making it that way? What allows for the unwinding, the unbinding of this heaviness, I wonder. And when we, through paying attention, we begin to distill what the Buddha teaches us. There are wise intentions, the intention to let go, to be content, the intention to be kind, the intention to refrain from doing stuff that causes more stress. When we get that and we get what the opposite is, then that really begins to stabilize our life. It's not that we're immediately perfect and avoiding aversive intentions or greedy intentions or the intention to distract ourselves or be deluded. But we just get a little better as the weeks and months and years go by because we care, because we're paying attention. We know that it matters how I'm relating. We just get clear about what helps and what doesn't help. And because we have this immediate feedback loop, like even when I do act out and I justify being averse, I see how it makes things worse. So it has that correcting mechanism built into it. Or when I relate with more kindness and more compassion and more renunciation, my life just works better. My life, the subjective experience is lighter and more free and nimble. And so that gets reinforced because it's directly, immediately experienced as being a more skillful, useful, easeful way of being. So this is key to how the Buddha understands the awakening process. It has to be a natural process, which is why that metaphor I used and many people have used over the years of a river is such a useful metaphor for understanding the practice. Because otherwise we're going to immediately assume, oh, I have to be skillful and I have to stop being unskillful. It's not like that. Framing is totally wrong. It's just a limited way of our understanding. So there's a wonderful book. It's called The Issue at Hand, and you can get a digital copy of this freely at Insight Meditation Center's website. That's the center that Gil Fronsdal started in the Redwood City. It's a Silicon Valley area of the Bay Area in California. It's really one of the great Insight Meditation Centers here in the country. And Gil is a wonderful teacher, of course, and also happens to be a wonderful Buddhist scholar, which really supports the clarity of his teaching, I think. Anyway, his book, The Issue at Hand, or Issue at Hand, is just a summary of the Buddhist teachings, very simple, powerful book. And he has a chapter there called According with Nature. And he's really talking about this aspect of wisdom that's all about aligning with what's already true. And that's another way of really getting a sense of what the Buddha means by wisdom. Wisdom is that force in our mind that aligns with the way it already is, always has been, always will be, because it's natural. And it's that alignment, like taking refuge in the nature, the underlying nature of the way things are. You see, that already has that sense of less dissonance, less stress when we align. So, I mean, this is a simple question we can ask ourselves, just as we're living our life, and of course, in our meditation times, just the simple question like, am I working in alignment with nature, or am I working against it? It just really clarifies, like, am I trying to make something happen, or is my practice about aligning with what is happening? Doesn't mean I'm giving into some bad habit. It means that I'm saying, oh yeah, this bad habit is moving. That's not a bad habit. Seeing a bad habit as a movement of nature is not succumbing to the bad habit. It's actually like that chant we did at the beginning of the class for those who were here. Everything arises and passes away. Seeing this clearly, understanding this deeply as it actually is, leads to the deepest happiness, which is peace, right? So we're trying to work with nature. And in this chapter, Gil gives the example like, a gardener seeing the little sprout, thinking, oh, I'll just tug on the seedling to help it grow. Well, of course, it doesn't work. What works is to understand the nature of the seedling, the seed, the seedling, the plant, and how to care for it. Like, what are the supporting causes? So when we get a sense of what it's like to be in the river of our life, the mind not dominated by greed, hatred, and delusion, not getting confused, identified with happiness, not getting confused or identified with unhappiness, with pleasure and pain, right? But just appreciating the more subtle but healing pleasure of non-attachment, of releasing, of letting go. And it's really about like how to stay in the river, how to stay in the movement of our life. And this is really like just as a basic teaching, like when we're sitting in meditation, when the body or mind feels tight, instead of immediately trying to make the body and the mind not tight, get curious about the tightness, maybe the tightness itself, the clenching of our heart, the clenching of our jaw, the fixedness of the mind. Maybe that is also in motion. But the wisdom hasn't yet seen what feels like a knot, hasn't seen that the knot, hasn't experienced that the knot is already in motion, already has in its underlying nature the nature to unwind and keep moving. Because see, this is the mistake we make over and over again when we experience suffering from a superficial point of view. We think it's a personal problem for me to fix. And that way of framing throws us off from the start, so that everything we do to alleviate suffering ends up being a cause for more tension. This is why listening doesn't mean we don't do anything or we don't participate in the bigger places of suffering in our world, like injustice, racism, economic injustice, climate change, so many ways that we're basically setting in motion suffering for each other. It just means that our activity, our participation really needs to come from this deep presence, this deep sensitivity, this deep listening. as opposed to a fixed view. Because a fixed view, really, this is another way in Buddhism we understand wisdom, is being suspicious of any fixed view. And it's just another way of saying that what we value, what wisdom values, is the listening, is the sensitivity, and the activity, the so-called my action in the world, is a natural flow, a natural blossoming out of that sensitivity. Just like when you think of a kayak navigating a river and not getting caught in the whirlpools or the rapids or the eddies or whatever, right? It's really about understanding the currents. And so not getting confused where I end up caught up in some branches or whatever. And it's the same way. It's like we're in living our life and we're not imagining that I have to do it and I have to do it right and I'll be screwed if I do it wrong. Because that fear and that seeming dependence on needing to be perfect ends up getting in the way of what really helps, which is that the sensitivity that we have when we're mindfully aware. There's a really powerful teaching from the Buddha where he says, he's talking about samadhi, which is really this wise, stable sensitivity. You know, it gets badly translated as concentration, but samadhi is much more about the settled sensitivity. Because the heart is settled, the mind is settled, we're profoundly sensitive, but we're not destabilized because of the sensitivity. Because the thing about samadhi, it has that wholesome pleasure of solidity, stability, settledness. And the healing of that stability allows us to handle the sensitivity that comes with samadhi. And the Buddha says in I think one of the most useful, important lines of teaching is when somebody, and this is a paraphrase, when somebody has samadhi, the heart inclines toward nibbana, toward freedom, the freedom of release, the going out of the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion. Just like the Ganges, the big river in northern India, flows to the ocean, the heart will incline toward release, the unbinding, when there's that stability. And this is what wisdom understands, like what I need to become a more free, a more wise and kind human being isn't to become perfect, but rather to learn how to be sensitive right in the middle of my life, at ease, listening, and just following the current as it comes and goes. So let me just finish by reading a little from Gil's chapter, and then hopefully some of you can stay for the small groups today. But this is Gil's chapter on according with nature, and he's just using that metaphor of a river. I believe that spiritual practice unfolds most smoothly when we find how to accord ourselves with nature. A useful metaphor for this is a river. To enter the spiritual life fully is to enter a stream that eventually carries you to the great ocean. All you have to do is get into the river and stay in it. Trust, persistence, mindfulness, clarity, and insight help us float in the river. Once we are floating, the nature of the river is to carry us effortlessly to the ocean. If we fight the river, if we fight against the current, we can exhaust ourselves trying to go against the natural flow. And he likes this image and makes a lot of sense. Ajahn Chah, a wonderful teacher who has passed away now, but he also used that image of the river. He mentions how it's so much better than the image of climbing a mountain, which just seems like a big burden the whole way. And it's just the image of climbing a mountain to get to the peak, it really sort of lends itself to this cult of perfection, needing to become perfect. And all the groveling people who are further down the mountain, they don't know a thing, and judgment. But when we're in a river, it's like we kind of get like, oh yes, sometimes I'm really in the flow of my life. I'm really not projecting greed, hatred, and delusion, not entrapped by those habits. And I really understand the freedom the Buddha points to. And other times I'm really stuck in an eddy, and I'm thrashing about, and I'm hating myself and blaming the river and blaming the branches, and then I'm back in the river. He goes on a little later, this does not mean that spiritual practice requires nothing of us. A fast river may require our attention and navigation to stay in the current, off the rocks, and out of the eddies. Practice requires mindfulness and investigation, supported by calm and inner stability. To discover nature and how to accord ourselves with it, often this entails learning how to leave ourselves alone, how not to interfere with the natural unfolding and healing that will occur if we give them a chance. Our conscious mind may not know what is supposed to unfold. Like a flower that needs water and fertilizer, our inner life opens in its varied ways when it's ready, if we nourish it with attentiveness, compassion, and acceptance. So I'll leave it here. We'll discuss wisdom as one of the beautiful perfections of the heart, one of the paramis, for at least one more week. And Nancy, I'm assuming you're going to be organizing the groups. And so people are welcome to stay for the small groups, or one way or another, find a time just to discuss, because the whole practice is about getting some information and then reflecting on this information so it becomes real for you. And doing that in a small group is a really powerful way. Hearing how other people are using the information is a really powerful way that leads then to the deepest part of the wisdom practice, which is the insight that comes from having this sort of spiritual information, having reflected on it. We start to see things we haven't seen before in terms of our own experience. Just a few announcements. Every Sunday afternoon when Fricke and I have a small community practice check-in online, you can join in from anywhere, 4:30 to 5:30 every Sunday, just a time for a sit and Q&A together. This also happens on Tuesday with Stacy McClendon, one of Common Ground's Dharma teachers, and myself, every Tuesday at 12 noon. Shelley Graff, when they're around, they're on retreat right now, but every Thursday at 9, I'm forgetting if it's, it's 9 o'clock on Thursday. And then Ramesh Sairam does it every other Saturday at 10:30. And I think Ramesh is going to be out of the country for a while, but I think he's planning to continue that in some fashion. And now we also have an in-person practice discussion, and that's Tuesday morning, 8 to 9, either in the garden or in our community room on site in Minneapolis. So join in for that. I lead that every Tuesday, 8 to 9. So just take advantage of these when you can. And of course, there's now half-day retreats and day-longs. They're both on Zoom and in person. And we have our new Sunday evening program, 7 to 8:30, just in person. So I'll pass it